Okay, testing, testing. Here's hoping this works because this is our monthly live stream. I am off camera again because I'm a big believer in only trying to fix one thing at a time. And the thing I've hopefully fixed is that we should be broadcasting over on Odyssey and Rumble again. So we usually have Fighting Zenithian over on Rumble. If you could just give us a chat, let us know you're there, and if any Odysseyans are on either. But I don't even see anyone in YouTube yet, but it says we're going and 0 dropped frames, so that's a good sign. How you doing, Chris?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Hello says hello. ASKM.
Oh, by the way, Shane, there's a guy with a skull. There's a guy wearing a spacesuit and he has a skull just like you. For some reason, he keeps asking me who turned out the lights.
That was a good episode.
Yeah.
The one where you first see River Song.
I can't. Why can't I? I can't. Why can't I? Hey, who turned off the lights?
Ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream. Stephen Moffat writes some creepy episodes.
Did he also write The Empty Child?
Yeah, I think he did, yeah. And he created The Weeping Angels. He wrote Blink.
Putting The Empty Child in front of I forgot what they were called, but those skeleton astronauts. Yeah, and all day the child's going, "Are you my mummy?" And the skeleton replies, "Who turned off the lights?"
And they get caught in a loop. Okay, was there ever a time when federal minimum wage could get you a studio apartment with only taking a third of your monthly pay? Well, you could calculate it yourself, because when coinage was still in silver, I think 1965 was the last year, or maybe 64 was the last year, and 65 was the first non-silver year. Anyway, when that happened, minimum wage was $1.25 an hour. So look up the milk price of a 64 quarter, multiply it by 5. That's how much you have per hour. Multiply that by the number of hours you work in a month and see what you can afford with that. And I understand that that's what government has stolen from us in inflation just since the 60s.
Yeah, Shane, your recent video about Trump not being able to do anything about the Department of Education, that kind of explains why one fatal flaw with the Constitution is that it gives the coin burst to Congress. Now, to be fair, some people say, well, that means it won't be dependent on a single individual who could bankrupt us. True, but now it's in the hands of a bureaucracy, and it's a lot harder to fight a bureaucracy than it is to fight an individual.
Yeah. Well, Congress isn't even the way it's supposed to be set up as it was originally. Because not only was the Senate supposed to be appointed by the state legislators instead of elected by popular vote, and that caused it basically turned the Senate into an oligarchy, even though it was supposed to do the opposite. The House of Representatives was supposed to have, and I forget what the range was, but it was like a certain number of people per representative, because they figure, okay, that amount of people, and it was something like 45,000 or something. So it's a lot, but it's enough where those people could, actually get together and, campaign and make sure they had a good. And now it's something really, really crazy beyond that.
I will say this: the recent Trump activity only goes to show though that goes to show that people who claim that Trump is violating the Constitution, he stands nothing for it. It clearly shows they haven't read it.
So just
because
very quickly, I did 200 million registered voters thereabouts, divided by 435 House members. That's just under 460,000 people per representative, and it's supposed to be a tenth that. Of course, that would mean that there were 10 times as many representatives in Congress.
yeah, if I recall correctly, wasn't the original point of Congress going to be they weren't going to coin the coin purse? Their original plan, at least the way the quote unquote anti-federalists one, is that they were strictly lawmakers and that was it.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah,
the
but then
states were the states had the power of the purse originally.
yeah, but Alexander Hamilton and the nationalists had to have their way and say, oh no, we need Congress to be in charge of money.
10th Amendment Center has so many good videos on early concepts like that. Definitely recommend checking them out.
I know you answered this. I think you answered this in a Q&A, but I still hate though how some state governors use the 10th Amendment to say, well, you see, that's the reason why we can have super strict gun laws in my state because it's under the 10th Amendment. Sorry, but
No,
because
it
of the
doesn't work
Second
that way.
Amendment, yep. Now, if the Constitution didn't have a Second Amendment, you'd have a point there, but we do.
Yeah.
And of course, they try to weasel their words and they try to say, well, the Constitution only applies to the federal government.
Nope. 14th Amendment made that clear.
Yep. There's all these debates about, if we should change or rewrite the Second Amendment. I agree, we should rewrite it. We should just we need to take away the well-regulated militia part and just say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I understand it was put there to explain why the Second Amendment was there, but I think as you pointed out, if we traveled back in time and told the founding fathers how it would be interpreted by future politicians, they would have said, yep, scrap the militia part, just say right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm going to try refreshing it.
Yeah, Alexander Hamilton. I do not know why our school teaches him as like he's one of our greatest founding fathers. It's like, listen, if we had listened to him, the United States would not be what we are today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I recall correctly, he basically wanted a monarchy, but without a monarch. Like he wanted the president to be like a supreme ruler, but not necessarily a monarch.
Well, he wanted the president to have a life term. I mean, he was initially wanting a monarch, and he was going to set up George Washington to be a monarch, and Washington shot him down on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, if I recall correctly, Washington didn't even want to be the president. The only reason he ran was because all of his friends and political and his backers and all that they pressured him to do it.
Well, they convinced him that he needed to be a go-between between the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians, which is why he put them both into high positions in his administration.
Yeah.
Of course, Hamilton was just supposed to be the treasurer. He wasn't supposed to be doing all that other stuff. Jefferson was Secretary of State, but Hamilton was kind of a bully.
Yep.
What do you think
don't get me
about a
wrong.
government with tech safeguards like shock collars? What would the shock collars do?
Yeah.
You're talking about like punishment if they do something unpopular?
Yeah.
There was a Doctor Who episode where that was Vengeance on Varos, and every time the governor announced a new policy, everyone voted and they had the yes and no buttons right next to their TVs, and if they voted no, then he started getting these, electrical jolts that if he got too many of it would kill him. And of course, he wasn't really in charge. There was a shadow government behind him.
Yeah.
Good
Funny thing
episode.
about fictional governments is that a lot of people who read the book, you know, Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, a lot of people seem to think that the Terrain Federation is fascist, but the more I read about it, you know, it's actually not really fascist in a way. It actually goes against a lot of fascist principles. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if we've got any
Oh,
love
okay.
over
Yeah.
on Odyssey or Rumble, and I'm not seeing anything yet.
Yeah.
I have noticed I put a typo in the top bar, but oh well. Yes, the column will get jolts if they're corrupt and doing something unlawful. I mean, who decides that?
Yeah, going back to the Terrain Federation from Starship Troopers, you know, one thing I actually kind of like about the Federation is like a lot of people say, well, it's fascist
You've
because the
cut
right to
off.
vote is limited to the mil. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my new headset is Bluetooth connected, so I have to use this wireless USB port to connect it. So it's kind of funky, but yeah. But yeah, they say only the military is allowed to vote. That's actually not true. You don't have to join the military to vote. You just have to perform a special civic duty. And from what I understand, the whole point behind it was that the Terrain Federation does have, you know, principles that lobby for individual liberty and freedom, but you have to be willing to fight and stand for them. Basically, that was the whole point. Which honestly, I think that's kind of admirable. Like, I think in real life it wouldn't work, but you know, from a strictly philosophical standpoint, I understand where Heinlein's coming from.
Well, it's still slavery.
Yeah. Still better than what Paul Van Hoven did when he made the film.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, I know a lot of people like that movie, but still, the fact that he flat out hated the movie. I'm sorry, if I was a producer and the director said, "Yeah, I read the first 2 chapters and I hate the book," he's fired instantly. Right there, he's fired. If the director does not like the source material, he shouldn't be making the film adaptation.
Oh God, who was the Star Trek writer they brought on, either for Next Gen or for the movies after Star Trek 6? I forget what, but he had mentioned he hadn't seen an episode of the series as a bragging point.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Why do you
I
think
mean,
that's a bragging point? Sit down and
yeah,
watch the
you know.
thing so you know the material.
Well, yeah, even if you're not necessarily the biggest fan, you should still try to get into it and figure out why people like it, you know. And like I said, if you're like Paul Van Hoven or however you pronounce his name, I can never pronounce his last
Verhoeven.
name, and you're just like, yeah, Verhoeven, and you're just like, yeah, I hate it. I'm gonna ditch it and I'm gonna make a mockumentary of it. Then fuck you. Yeah.
Read it, but also don't pretend you understand it, because even if you think you understand it, someone else might have a different interpretation. So present it well, and let everyone else do their own interpretation.
Mm. Speaking of reading, I've actually been reading a couple of Stephen King novels, and I have this one thing to say. Why do people think he's a good writer?
I have no idea. I think he's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I read
I mean,
Pet
movies based
Sematary.
on his books have been good. The books themselves,
Yeah.
terrible.
Oh yeah. I think the real reason why Stephen King hates The Shining is because, let's be real here, the film is far better than the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
loads. The film's a friggin' masterpiece.
Oh yeah. Because here's the thing, Stephen King actually made a miniseries and it was much more loyal to the book, and everyone agreed it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Stephen King's just jealous that Stanley.
The Kubrick was able to do it better.
Yeah.
Do you think a decentralized internet will be possible anytime soon? Soon, probably not, but I think sooner or later it's going to happen. And I wonder if it's one of those cases where Starlink is going to make that possible. Because if you can access the system from anywhere, all you'd have to do is put in safeguards so that you access it privately. You know, you pay for it with cryptocurrency. And no one knows who you are as far as, you know, your location or your access point or anything like that. because you're just somewhere in the world.
And going back to what I
And
said about
that's why
Stephen King.
I think I mean, I get it's like this for the rollout, but when he says like Starlink is now available in this country and now it's available in that country, I mean, I get it. You can't turn it on everywhere all at once, but still, the fact that he can do that, the fact that he can tell where you are and shut off access if you're in the wrong place, that's not a good start. I get it though, but once Starlink is established and is available worldwide, he should shut off completely whatever system that is. Favorite sci-fi writer? Got to be Heinlein. All the love to Heinlein.
And speaking of Starlink and all that, a lot of people are claiming that Elon Musk is really in charge of the government now. He's not actually. In fact, I think someone pointed out, it's like, listen, all the firings and all that with Doge and all that, that's all Trump's doing. The only thing Elon is doing is saying, Mr. Trump, here's what I found. What are you going to do about it?
He's an advisor. Just like presidents always have advisors.
Yeah. Another thing that's funny too is like so many people is like, I understand, like, it is true that constitutionally speaking, Trump can't shut down, a lot of these departments without Congress approval. A lot of people are also saying, oh, the firings are unconstitutional too. He can't do that. It's like, actually he can. Because here's the thing. They are working for the department, which is a branch of the executive branch.
They're all executive branch. The courts are not supposed to be intruding on that, and the Supreme Court's been clear about that for decades, if not centuries. It's all under the president has the power to make and break contracts.
Yep.
Yeah. So other than Heinlein, I might have to say Orson Scott Card.
Yeah. Despite the fact that he doesn't like gay people.
Yeah, but I mean his books are good. That's what I'm going by.
Yeah. And it's not like, and from what I understand, it's not like he's one of those, oh, they're abominations to God. It's more like he's just, he kind of has more
he's a Mormon. He's a Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just what he was raised by, so he's a little uncomfortable with them. Because that's just, unfortunately, that's how he was raised, and it takes years to do that. That's why I kind of hate it when I hear those people that get mad. Like when people say, I've had people come up to me and say, how do I stop being a racist or homophobic? And I get mad at them and I want to punch them. It's like, well, here's the thing. If you were raised in a religious, in a super strict religious background that taught you that gays and all that are bad and abominations, it's going to take a while to actually unbreak that mentality,
Doge, by the way, Mr. No, is not a new department. It's the United States Digital Service renamed to the United States
in a way,
Doge Service.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, technically Obama was the one who made Doge. It just wasn't called Doge. It was called something else.
The U.S. Digital Service. So that we can understand this internet thing.
Also, fun fact about separation of powers, I actually learned something interesting. Like, we know how there's there's that amendment in place to keep the president, because even though he's the commander in chief, only Congress can declare war or approve of a military action. So I was wondering, out of curiosity, what the reverse was true. What if, let's say, Congress wants to declare war on, I don't know, they want to declare war on Iceland, but the president thinks that's stupid. Let's not go to war with Iceland. Can he stop that? I looked it up. Yes, he can. If even if Congress declares war, the president has every authorization to say, nope, I don't approve of this. I'm not going to deploy the troops. I'm going to order the military to stand down and not carry out the order.
There's another very good 10th Amendment Center video on just that. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, in fact. Well, it's not the president is the last word. Whoever's hands it is in at the time is the last word. If the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, theirs is the last word. If Congress says it's unconstitutional and repeals it, theirs is the last word.
Yep.
That's the whole idea. Anyone at any point. That's why they all swear an oath to the Constitution. Because they can all do that at any point. And say, this is unconstitutional. I'm putting a stop to it right here. And they'll try to say, oh, well, I'm just a cop, or I'm just a sheriff, or I'm just a, legislator or Congress. What say do I get? Well, you swore an oath, didn't you? What's that oath supposed to mean if you don't have any power to uphold it?
Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the sad reality is that you know, the biggest problem with a lot of people who run for president and promise to make all these changes, the sad truth, the reality is, and going back to the separation of powers, is that the separation of powers is basically a double-edged sword. Yes, it means, it keeps, one branch from overstepping its limit, but the double edge is that, unfortunately, that means, like, if one group or both groups does become horribly corrupt, the sad reality is that, if you get elected president, you can, in theory, clean up the executive branch, but the Supreme Court and Congress, there's not much you can do about that.
We are on Rumble. Fighting Zenithian is in the chat. Welcome back. He's doing the link thing. What happens to kids that get yelled at? Okay. I've seen the work on spanking. I haven't seen the work on being yelled at.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't abused by my parents, but they did fight a lot when I was a kid, and I think that's the reason why I can't stand yelling.
I had it pretty good. My parents got along. They never really fought.
Yeah. I mean, because it's happened to my mom, and unfortunately, it happened with Doug. Her ex. Like, so many people are like, "Well, I yell at you because you don't listen to me," and all that. It's like, well, first of all, I do have autism, so it can be difficult for me to follow instructions. And two, if I am genuinely not following instructions, the last thing you want to do is yell at me, because I can't handle that.
Cops wearing red 249 years ago switched to blue today. It's interesting. I wonder why they changed that.
Yeah.
Still not seeing anyone over on Odyssey, but if we're going on Rumble, we should be going on Odyssey, because it's the same plugin that's doing it. And it says it's sending it at 30 frames a second, about 3 megabits per second. So same as Rumble. It's a little bit difficult to tell because the plugin I had to get to do it was made for VTubers, so it's in Japanese. But I think I've got it.
And I still can't believe that there's a strong movement, that there's actually that there's actually a large petition to pardon Luigi, how do I pronounce his last name?
Luigi Mangione?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the redcoats. Yeah. The algorithm is suppressing you bad. Oh, yeah, it is. I could show you charts if I were allowed. And I can see whenever anyone shares it, because it gets a little bump in the algorithm before the shadow banning gets in. So the trick is to share them. That's the trick.
Something I wish the media and a lot of pop culture would stop doing all the time when it comes to discussing, when it comes to adding insurance, is that they treat the equivalent of, if your insurance claim is denied, that means you can't get the medical treatment. That's actually not true. You can still get it. It just means they're not going to pay for it.
Right.
Like, yeah, it'll be super expensive, but, there are ways you can still pay for it. But the media and a lot of TV shows portray it as like, oh, your claim is denied. Yep, you're kicked out. You're not getting the treatment then. No, they'll still treat you,
Oh, yeah, Night Shift. One of the original things in the charter for the U.S. Marshals was slave catchers. Why are we talking about Jeffrey Jones and John Cristofalusi? He says they have nothing on thuggish bureaucrats, but I'm not sure.
Can you hear me, or are you paying more attention to the chat?
I'm trying to go through Finding Zen's comments on
Oh.
Rumble.
Yeah, police, it's too bad. It's too bad I wasn't a lawyer and around during that one court case where it was proven that the police are under no obligation because they're only about the community as a whole. Because then I would have said, okay, so let me ask you this: your job is to protect the community as a whole, right? Correct. So you can't help this individual, correct? So you don't take names, numbers, anything. You don't even listen to the guy, correct? Well, that means that guy, that criminal that offended him, he's gone away. You're not going to be looking for him, and he's gonna reoffend again. How's that keeping the community safe as a whole?
And what is the community made up of? It's a bunch of individuals, right?
Yeah,
how are you
I
going to
really want
protect
to
the
know
community without protecting the individuals?
Yeah.
That will be funny, sending the IRS an unsubscribe notice.
Yep.
Continuing to bother, this is now a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Stop contacting me.
I still don't get why people think corporations have more power than government. And when you ask, it's like, well, because they make more money than the government. It's like, yeah, but the government has the authority to take your money by force. Like, if you stop paying your credit card payments, the worst that they can do to you is either sue you for the money or basically cancel you out and confiscate the stuff you purchased with the stuff. And that hurts your credit, but you still have your freedom. What happens when you stop paying the IRS? You go to prison.
What killed the skeptic movement? Yeah, it was atheism plus. That was the beginning of the end.
Yep. Hey, you gotta give Richard Dawkins some credit. That guy tends to keep his political views for the most part to himself, and I think he said multiple times that while he does have some political views, I think he leans left, but he does say, I try not to emphasize that because my focus is on teaching skepticism, and I do not want skepticisms to suffer the same fate as religion, where it gets involved in politics and it becomes corrupted.
Yeah.
Yeah, because to be fair, a lot of religions do have some generally good advice, life advice and all that. The problem is when a guy in a castle reads the Bible and says, "Yeah, you know what? I like this idea. I decree that this is our only religion we will follow." That's when it becomes a problem.
Well, that's the problem I have with secular humanism, because the tenets of secular humanism I like and I agree with, but they're not based on any real foundational principles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're so floofy and open to interpretation that, I mean, you could use them to set up the Soviet Union and say, hey, look, we're following humanism, even though that was about as far from humanist as you could get.
Yeah, kind of like transhumanism. I had an argument with those guys earlier and all that because we were talking about how he's like, eventually technology will advance us, and I'm like, no, technology can only take you so far and all that, because as long as we live in a rule that's governed by the laws of thermodynamics, this idea that we can use technology to improve ourselves and create a world without want and all that, not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to get the energy from somewhere.
Yep.
That's what I keep thinking about Star Trek, and I've been thinking of this more and more since Heather and I are watching Next Gen, rewatching for me because she had never seen it. And it's the first time I've seen all the episodes since the original run. But, the whole thing about, they don't need money and everything, and this because, you have the replicator, and the replicator can do everything as long as you have the energy for it. And energy, we've got antimatter, which is a whole other discussion. There's no way to actually, use antimatter as a power source and get more out than you put into it. But the thing is, we see throughout every single version of it that energy is scarce. There's always, I need more power. I need more energy. Oh, we got to take energy from this system to go to that system. So energy is not infinite. That's your scarcity. So that's what realistically your economy would be based on. Your unit of currency would be the joule or the kilowatt hour or something like that.
Yeah.
And then whatever budget you had, you could make whatever you want with your replicator. But there would still be a scarcity there because there's only so much energy to go around. It might be a lot by today's standards, and you could probably live like a king, but it would still be limited.
That's why I'm not gonna lie. I do give the writers of those remake Star Trek films from 10 years ago, directed by J.J. Abrams. I will give them some credit that they kind of portrayed the Federation as maybe it's not as awesome and altruistic as the old series made them out to be. Because let's be real here, if that organization were to exist, it would be a dictatorship.
Well, they kind of went that direction with Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
To the point where they're actually resistance movements and even terrorists.
Yeah. I even like how Deep Space Nine kind of makes fun of, some of the tropes too and all that, because the original idea of Star Trek is Earth, there's no money, there's no hope and want. And Star Trek 9 goes around saying, hey, these alien races, they have all these cool things. We want that stuff. And the aliens are like, okay, you gotta buy it from us. Well, we don't have any money. Well, then we're not gonna give it to you.
Yeah.
I know there was an episode
that was really a next gen thing. In the original series, they were all about having to earn your pay for the week and about what can you afford on shore leave and things like that. And I think it was because of Star Trek 4 when they said they don't use money in the 24th century. They meant they didn't use dollar bills, green pieces of paper, and so they had to go figure out how to get some money to get what they needed. And then that kind of got misinterpreted by the writers of Next Gen.
Yep. I still find it funny though how, now granted it was a product for its time, about how in Star Trek the Soviet Union is still around and one of the crew members is from Leningrad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the point of that at the time was to make Russians feel included into, what they were doing on Star Trek. So if they had said, by the way, in the future, your whole country is gone and now it's called St. Petersburg again, it would have been kind of insulting to them.
Well, the funny thing
is
that...
Even if they had predicted that, which of course they didn't. It was just...
Yeah. Funny thing is too is that even though the town, it's now called St. Petersburg, and historically it was called St. Petersburg prior to the Russian Revolution, it actually wasn't called St. Petersburg, it was called Petrograd.
Yeah, they always have to change the names of cities to make it confusing.
Yep.
There's this math puzzle called the 7 Bridges of Königsberg. They're like, well, where's Königsberg? Well, it's actually Kaliningrad now. And the bridges have changed, so the solution is different.
There actually is a strong movement, from what I understand, of people in Kaliningrad trying to make it its own independent thing called Koenig, and they want to create an independent Republic of Königsberg. Because if I recall correctly, even though it's now controlled by Russia, the majority of people there are actually Polish and German.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've spoken online to people that are from that area, and they're like, well, what's Kaliningrad like? And they're like, it's a dump.
Yeah.
Yeah. It used to be a great, mighty, beautiful city and the pride of the Prussian Empire. Then the Soviets took over after the end of World War II, and they turned it into a brutalist dump.
It's right it's right between Poland and Lithuania.
Yeah. Yeah, why there's fans of brutalist architecture, I have no freaking clue.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. It says it's an enclave, but it shows it being on the shore,
Yeah.
on the Baltic Sea. Oh, I guess because it's not directly connected to Russia, so it's considered an enclave.
Yeah.
So I guess Alaska would be an enclave? I don't know.
Yeah, I think Alaska's an
I always thought an
Speaking of
enclave was when you had one country that was surrounded by another. Like, what's that country that's like completely inside of South Africa?
Lesotho,
Lesotho. Yeah.
too, I think it's called.
Yeah,
Did you
Lesotho.
hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lesotho.
Yeah. There's also San Marino, which is completely surrounded by Italy.
There's some weird ones, I think, with India and Bangladesh, where it's one inside another, inside another, inside another.
Mm. Don't even get us started on the Balkans.
Man, I would love to see a city set up like Metropolis, the silent film, not the Superman, the way they did the architecture in the silent film.
Wasn't the guy who made Metropolis, wasn't he a communist?
Fritz Lang, I think he was anti-communist.
Hmm.
Made great movies though. M is excellent if you've never seen it.
Yeah, someone wants to know, are there any other authors you like besides Highland or
Oh yeah, that was when I talked about Orson Scott Card.
oh yeah. Yeah. I was at Barnes and Noble yesterday just browsing, and oh man, there were so many pro-communist, pro-SJW books now in there. I also briefly skimmed this one book. It was called Poisoned, and it was about the Jack in the Box scandal. When they Shane, can you
Oh,
hear me?
when they had the tainted meat.
Yeah. Sorry,
I
Shane. I'm
remember
sorry
that.
if I'm asking if you can hear. Sorry if I'm asking if you can hear me because, like I said, my mic's it's a new headset. But yeah. But yeah, the book was all about how it's like, oh, these poor children got sick and died, and like how there was a big lawsuit against Jack in the Box and all that, and how it changed and revolutionized America. And part of me just wants to wonder. It's like, okay, but here's one thing I want to ask: where were the mass poisonings before these new laws came into place?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's gotten worse under the USDA.
Yep.
Regulation will kill independent websites while Google remains unscathed. Yep, that's true. And that's also what I've been trying to talk to people about, with this AI stuff. We got to stop the AI. Well, the only thing you're going to do is, push the jackboot down on independent producers and artists.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. Everything people say about AI and how it's gonna ruin artwork. You could easily say the same thing about a paintbrush.
Well, I mean, people are like, oh, look at this thing this AI did. It's terrible. Okay. Look at this thing this actual artist did on DeviantArt or Pinterest. It's awful.
Deviant or yeah, yep.
You can find bad artists out there.
Oh yeah.
And you don't need to be an AI to screw up hands. Hands are really difficult to draw.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, a lot of yeah. I actually remember googling that because people were like, how come AI artwork draws hands so weird?" And there was actually one artist that said, well, to play the devil's advocate in favor of AI, hands are some of the hardest parts to draw on a human, especially if you're having them doing something actiony like holding on to something."
Hands and faces.
Yep.
That's
Fun
the
fact.
two hard parts, and it's the hardest parts for AI. Just sit down and try to draw a hand sometime. Just try
Yeah,
it.
fun. Yeah, fun. Yeah, fun fact. That's the reason why for many decades, a lot of cartoon characters wore gloves, and they only had 3 or 4 fingers because were so complicated to draw. They were just like, you know what? Give them gloves because that'll make it easier, and you know what? Nobody's gonna care if they have 5 hands. They're cartoons. Just give them 3 or 4 fingers, and that's good.
Yeah, you have 4 fatter fingers, and that makes it different enough from a human hand that you don't have to get it perfect.
Yep.
But if you've seen the animators that tried to animate with all 5 fingers,
Yep. It can
it
be
just
done though.
didn't
It
work.
absolutely.
It can be done. It just didn't work as well as.
Yeah. I mean, today
You
it
can
can be
see
it can
why
be
they
done much
did
more.
4.
Yeah. I mean, today it's a lot more.
Incidentally, fun fact: it's the ring finger that's removed because the ring finger is the only finger that doesn't have its own distinct visual role in the hand. It's either supporting the pinky or the middle. Yeah, I mean the way you learn to draw hands is just with ontology. You draw not like a literal skeleton, but you draw like these lines that would represent, like here's a line for the up to the first knuckle, and then the first knuckle to the second knuckle, and so on. And then this is how the fingers bend, and this is how they move, and they can move this way and not that way. And you're basically drawing a skeleton of the hand first, and then you flesh that out and then erase the skeleton.
Gizm says, speaking of communism, why is it so popular in Hollywood? Well, Razorfist did a pretty good video about this some years ago, before he became a little crazy, but it's pretty much because right from the get-go, when the Soviet Union came along, they actually formed a partnership with Hollywood. Yeah, no joke. There's been documents that have been revealed from the former Soviet Union that yes, the KGB had agents in Hollywood, and they were providing money and funding to many of the Hollywood unions in there. So naturally, they're going to be a little bit more sympathetic, to the people who are holding their purse strings.
Plays existed a century after cinema, just like orchestras still exist even after, CDs and streaming. And people still go to concerts, and they can just listen to the artist whenever they want.
Yeah.
Photographers there are photographers that are still shooting on film, even though most of it's digital now.
Yep.
It just becomes a stylistic choice and a genre instead of a necessity.
Yep, and people still conduct public speeches for a living, even though we have the written word now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Finding Zen is mentioning a search engine called Akunda. I hadn't heard of that one. I have to make sure to check that out.
Have you guys ever read about the volcanic winter of 536 AD? Yep. There's actually a lot of joke amongst a lot of people who study history and all that. The joke is that anytime someone says, all this stuff going on in the world, this is the worst year ever. At least it's not 536 AD.
Is that the one that on all the lists is like the worst year ever recorded?
Yep, that's when we had that volcanic eruption. We had that volcanic eruption that caused a pretty nasty winter. It led to mass crop shortages, and then there was a lot of wars because, if I recall correctly, the Western Roman Empire had fallen apart, so a lot of knowledge was lost. And then the Justinian plague hit Europe in the Middle East, which many medical historians believe was the first incidence of the Black Plague appearing.
Zen, if you could just pop a link in there for Acunda, because I'm trying to search for it and I'm just getting Anaconda. I'm always on the lookout for a better search engine, because I am not really that happy with DuckDuckGo recently. But whenever it doesn't work, the only one that does work is Yandex. But I'm not too happy about Yandex being in Russia. It's like they're always something.
I gotta get a new chair. This one's starting to fall apart. If you hear any creaking and cracking, that's on mine. It's my chair. It's breaking. It's old.
I got to figure out one of my chairs squeaking and lube it. Poland officially gave their name of Kaliningrad Oblast to Kroloviec. I don't know how that's pronounced. But that's more the traditional Polish name, so apparently they're doing that as kind of a middle finger to Russia.
Yeah.
I can't really find anything about an independence movement.
Yeah.
Oh, this is saying it's technically an exclave, not an enclave.
Yeah.
I guess an exclave would be away from, whereas an enclave would be inside of.
Yeah. I think an exclave, that's more like Hawaii than it is
But not Alaska.
I think Alaska. Actually, I think Alaska would be an exclave too, because it technically isn't surrounded by a country, because it borders the Arctic Ocean or the North Pacific Ocean.
Let's just look that up.
Speaking of which, when I was in middle school,
exclave is a portion of a country's territory not connected to the main part.
So yeah, Hawaii and Alaska would be exclaves.
Yeah. Enclave is when it's surrounded by one other state, only one other state or entity, and that includes if it's in territorial waters.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is true about the American Revolution, you know. It's kind of funny too, because like so many people are like, Trump's trying to make himself a king. That's against the principles of the revolution. The funny irony is that when you actually read the actual American Revolution, most Americans, even the patriots, didn't really have any grievances against the king. A lot of our complaints were against Parliament, not the king.
Well,
the reason why
it was really just a matter of, we want to do, what we've been doing, and they've been stopping us, so we want to go out of England so we can continue doing it on our own.
Yeah, I think
it wasn't presented to the people as any major radical change.
Yeah.
Just a way of of keeping the government everyone basically wanted while also solving the problems that led to it.
No, I mean it's that's the reason why when America won the revolution and gained its independence and defeated the British, for the most part, that's what we continue doing. As the idea of the idea we have now, or the way our government is set up now, if I recall correctly, that didn't come until like 10, 15 years after the revolution.
But yeah, because the Constitution was ratified in 1789.
Yep.
13 years after.
Yep. Yep, because we gave the state governments too much power, and many federalists said, well, why don't we just limit what the states can do? But then the nationalists came along and said, oh, I got a better idea. Let's just create a powerful federal government.
Yeah.
Mm.
And really, it was, there were a few issues, but it was primarily the fact that they were inflating the currency because the currency wasn't based on anything.
Yeah, when I was in school, I told the reason why the Articles of Confederation failed was because the federal government couldn't tax money, so it ran out of money.
No, it taxed them. It taxed the states, and they paid for it by printing money.
Yeah.
And you say we have to pay these debts for the Revolutionary War? Okay, fire up the press.
Yep. Yeah, the French Revolution, on the other hand, was trying to change everything from the ground up. Yep. And we all know how that ended. I do not know why the French Revolution gets romanticized, because arguably France ended up in a far worse, not to sound like a monarchist, but France ended up in a far worse situation after their revolution before the revolution.
That's why it was called the Reign of Terror.
Yep.
Welcome back, Zen. If you missed what I said, I asked you to put in a link to Acunda for me, because when I search for it, I can't find it. It keeps showing me things about anacondas. So I can't find the search engine you're talking about. Oh my God, they're still going on and on about this signal leak.
Yeah. Yes, because I've learned to stop reading. I've learned to stop trusting the history they teach you in school.
I mean, the leak was bad because they need to figure out who added the guy, Goldberg, into the chat to begin with. But there was no top secret war plans or anything being discussed.
Funny enough, Schism, that's actually what Ryan Macbeth thinks. He did a video not too long ago where he was talking about, Trump's attitude and all that, and he more or less said, I think it's just one of those things where, Trump wants, Europe to be strong and resist Russia, but they need to learn that, listen, America's not doing so well economically speaking. If heaven forbid World War III breaks out, we're going to be focused on fighting China. So you guys got to get your act together. And we've been telling them that for many years, but they didn't do anything about it.
Well, it was actually Zelensky doing the outburst. Watch the whole thing, and not just the clips they put around. The guy thought he could talk down to Vance and Trump, and they corrected him on that.
I do know I do know there's that one Canadian libertarian that actually that he sarcastically said during a speech that we should be thanking Trump for the tariffs because it's finally making Canadians waking up to get their shit together to realize the way we've been handling our own economy is shit, and we've been heavily dependent on the United States for economic stimulus, and we understand now that we can't depend on them. We actually got to make Canada, economically viable.
The Russian military is a joke. At this point, they've depleted most of their good equipment and troops, so there will be more than a match. I've been hearing that for 2 years. People said that since the invasion started. Anytime now, they're on the run. Oh, they're on their last troops. They don't have that much equipment yet. Ask me how I can spot propaganda.
Maxine Bernier, I presumed. That was him.
The leader of the PPC? Sorry, my brain's not on the same track you're on, Mr. No.
No, I'll have to look up. I'll have to see something else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Well, the guy said
Maxine Bernier. I guess the PPC is a party in Canada.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. I'll have to look him up. I'll have to look at him. It was a conversation I had with Tim.
Oh, God. Forbes. Things are bad at Tesla. They're about to get much worse.
I will say this, though. I've been talking to Tim, Tim Dyson, because he lives in Canada, and he says, contrary to what the media says, most Canadians don't give a crap about the tariff. It's only the politicians in Toronto and Ottawa that are throwing a fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's not to say, the Canadians, like the tariffs or anything. They don't, but generally speaking, they're mostly like, well, you know what? That's just how life is now. Today's a terrible year. We'll just have to put up with it. Kind of like, they kind of have like the British stoicism, just like, oh, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
I will say
Oklo just revealed a design for a 75 megawatt microreactor, and man, it looks nice. There's a company that put some thought into architecture. Oh, it's a nuclear facility. Let's make it this, gray round thing. Not them. More about the look. Here's all you need to know about the signal leak. It was a group chat. If you add the wrong person into the group chat, they can see everything. And Signal's state-of-the-art encryption, which is the best in the world, isn't going to help you in that case.
Yeah, I mean, and let's be real here. Politicians have been doing that forever, Going back, because I've had this conversation with the F-35. That's one thing people who talk about the F-35 do not want to acknowledge. And from what I've actually heard, this is a genuine concern within, the Air Force and Navy, is that the F-35, is it's basically a flying supercomputer and all that. But many people have pointed out, well, does it have good end-to-end encryption? Because, to protect it from being hacked or having its, network compromised. And the general attitude is like, oh, that won't happen. You can't hack it. You would need a whole room full of computers, and I doubt our enemies have that. I don't know. We've seen time and time again people hacking the U.S. government military functions from their own garages.
Yeah. Well, that's why the Navy's always been big about that, because they have to worry about it when they're floating around in ships in international waters or even enemy waters.
I have heard that's the issue. Is like the Navy is concerned with the F-35 is it protect from cybersecurity, and the Air Force is being snobbish and like, oh, they won't hack us.
I mean, that's why the Navy did things like they got behind Tor and they got behind a lot of other,
Yeah.
secure developments.
Yeah. I heard this one joke from some ex-military people say it's like, listen here, if you see a person that served in the military and they are diehard progressive Democrats, 9 out of 10 times they were in the Air Force.
And by the way, yes, that means the Navy uses Tor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, you still got to have your OPSEC, because end-to-end encryption protects everything in between the two ends, but nothing more. If you're typing your, super secret text chat in full view of a security camera, that encryption isn't going to do you much good. And I mean, we've seen all sorts of that, like with a lot of these court cases where the prosecutors are just leaking things to the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's like, doesn't anyone want to investigate that? Why are there all these leaks out of prosecutors' offices?
How would you have ended Jim Crow without the 64 Civil Rights Act? Simple. The market would have taken care of it. In fact, the reason why a lot of the Jim Crow laws were disappearing was because a lot of Southern businesses were losing so much money from the boycotts that they basically said, screw the law, let blacks in.
Well, what desegregated Las Vegas wasn't any political anything. It wasn't civil rights laws. It was the casinos.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, we could get money from black people if it weren't for these laws.
Yeah.
We're paying Sammy Davis Jr. to get on stage and do his acting. We're paying him all this money. We could make some of it back if he could just waltz on over to the bar and order him something.
Yeah.
And it was the first major city to integrate for that reason. Which is something else that that last, whatever season and a half, whatever it was, when Deep Space Nine started going downhill, they had that holosuite program that was Vegas in 1962, and Cisco's going, oh, Jake, how can you be a part of that? People who look like us wouldn't have been allowed in. I was like, yeah, they would. Vegas had integrated by then.
Yeah.
Way to give a middle finger to a city that was ahead of its time. Jeez.
Oh, yeah.
You can look this stuff up, But I guess they just assumed that before government passed the Civil Rights Act that no one was doing it.
Yeah, that's a trend we tend to see in a lot of those historical fiction, is everyone in the Deep South was a raving racist. Everyone was pro Jim Crow until a handful of politicians said, wait, this is wrong. No, most
it was
Southerners
actually the other way around.
Yeah.
For another story, look up the Woolworth sit-in Greensboro, North Carolina. Because they weren't required by law to segregate. They just thought that's what people wanted. And the sit-in let him know, hey, maybe that's not a good business decision. Maybe we have to do something else.
Yeah, and another thing, you brought this up about Plessy versus Ferguson that they don't teach about in school is that it was actually the railway company that brought up Plessy versus Ferguson because they hated the segregation laws because it was actually making operating their businesses more expensive.
Yeah, it was a big hassle for them. It was a big expense for them. And they did all of that to try to get the law overturned, and it backfired.
Yeah, in fact, we brought this up on Plessy versus Ferguson. It was staged to get Plessy to get arrested so they could take it to the Supreme Court and show, look how stupid this law is. But there was one problem at the time. The Supreme Court had a raving racist in it, and he was very influential, and he convinced the other judges, oh yeah, segregation's okay. I forgot his
Yeah.
name, but yeah.
That was a really bad time for the Supreme Court because you also had Buck v. Bell that more people should talk about because that was never overturned.
Yeah.
Buck v. Bell is the one about forced sterilization, particularly of women.
Yeah.
You want to know why Kamala Harris was able to get away with doing that? Buck v. Bell.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, to give credit where credit is due, they have done a lot of good stuff, but one thing I really love doing to people, who are diehard Planned Parenthood fans is bring up the fact that their founder was a dedicated member of the eugenicist program, and she actually used Planned Parenthood to carry out some of her eugenicist beliefs.
And SKM, speaking of railroads, the high-speed rail in Cali has to be a money laundering scheme. Yeah, for all the money that was spent where nothing was done, where did it go? And that's the difference between them and, a company like Tesla when they say, okay, we're going to build tunnels under Vegas to have cars go through them, to have Teslas go through them, to give people rides to a different part of the city. And if you're doing this as a private company, you've got to get value for your money. You've got to end up making money. So you've got to get an end product up and running. Whereas if you're government and the whole thing just goes into a sinkhole, well, you can just tax more money and just keep getting, and just tell the people, oh, well, we need more money. We're under the cost overruns. It's because of this. It's because of that. It's because of the wildfires. It's because of climate change. It's because of whatever you want to blame on.
Yeah. It's because of Man Bear Pig.
And in reality, you're just funneling it to your buddies. That's a lot of what Doge is finding in the federal government.
Yeah.
You have, like the...
That's the reason why I often tell people, it's like, oh, they're gonna cut USAID. A lot of charities and organizations are gonna be hurt by this. It's like, well, guess what? They were being hurt long before, because the fact of the matter is, a lot of the money that USAA said that's supposed to go to starving children in Africa, it doesn't go to starving children in Africa. It goes to friends of the politicians who are members of the charity that says they're giving money to starving children in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like the that one group that was Doctors for AIDS Vaccine Advocacy or whatever it was. There's no AIDS vaccine. Yeah. How are you advocating for something that doesn't exist? And then when you look at the money, they don't use it to fund research into making an AIDS vaccine or anything like that, or even to promote, to get, if they were spending money to like convince billionaires or whoever to put up money to fund research into AIDS vaccine. They don't do any of that. They just pass it on to these other so-called charities who pass it on to other charities who are tied to these politicians.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, charity is good and all that, but people, you got to do your research on charities.
Yep. Because a lot of them are scams.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot about the 501c3 setup that makes money laundering kind of easy.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them are scams, or in some cases, they're genuine and they are trying to do good things, but they're causing unintended consequences. Like what happened in the 90s when that one charity gave so much clothing away to the people of Africa that it actually put all the local tailors out of business, and many tannery and clothing companies within Africa shut down. And at first people were like, well, that's good because these things were factory hellholes, that were terrible and all that. But then the people of Africa were like, yeah, but it was our main source of income, and now we don't have jobs. Now we can't feed ourselves.
That was, this was decades ago, I think. But it was one African economist who published, and the title of the article was something along the lines of, "For God's sake, stop the aid." Yeah. And he was talking about how aid actually it is terrible for poor Africans, and it just displaces everything they're trying to do in the marketplace. And it's also a big grift for the corrupt politicians.
Oh yeah. A really famous example is the Band Aid concert in the 1980s. That gave us the famous song. Famous song. Do they know it's Christmas time? And it was to raise money and aid to relieve Ethiopia from a drought. And yeah, they did raise a lot of money. And guess who took that money? The Ethiopian government, and they used it to wage a civil war on a group of people, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was Bob Zeldoff, wasn't it? He does a lot of charity stuff. You know, the Boomtown Rats.
I don't know.
I think that was
So
him.
and I mentioned this before, and I'll mention this again. Scrooge kind of had a good point. Kind of had a good point. To be skeptical about charity because look, at the end of the day, if I was in Scrooge's shoes, I would have said, well, that's a nice thing to do, but how is people giving meat, bread, and wine for one night once a year? How's that actually gonna save them? How's that actually gonna relieve them out of poverty? That's another thing too. I would have brought up. I would have brought up if I was Scrooge's lawyer. When in the Grocer Christmas Present said, "Well, if Tiny Tim should die, maybe he should die and decrease the surplus population." I would have been like, Mister President, that wasn't when Scrooge said that. When my client was saying that, he was not referencing to people like Tiny Tim. He was referencing people, who were in abject poverty, and there are options available for them, like the workhouses, but they refused to go to them because I'd rather die on the street than go to that place.
Yep, they don't want to work, then let them die, and thus deplete the surplus
Yeah,
population. The people who would take without giving back. That's who he
yeah.
was talking about.
Yeah, and despite what some people say, there are people like that do exist. There are people, that are living on the street that don't want to work because, quote unquote, getting a job and earning money, that's working for the man.
The whole point of Scrooge was not to be like this ultimate evil person that you hate. You were supposed to see a lot of yourself in Scrooge so
Yeah,
that you can go through the transformation with him as you read the book. That was the idea.
yeah.
And a lot of the stuff the early Scrooge says before he's reformed, a lot of that is straight from other things that Dickens had published.
Yeah.
You know, like when he goes against the blue laws that existed at the time.
Yeah.
Dickens, a few years ago, had published an essay under a different name, but he was making the same points.
Well, Mister No, yeah, the workhouses could be bad, but you got to put it within the time period. It's compared to what? Life has trade-offs.
Well, and the workhouses were government run, so that didn't
Well,
help.
yeah, a lot of them were. Speaking of which, true. It's one plot element that I still don't understand, and I've yet to see a proper explanation for that. Why was Oliver Twist kicked out of the orphanage for asking for more porridge? Couldn't they have just said no, no, you already had yours, go away?
It's been too long since I've read that. I've seen too
Yeah,
many, adaptations in the interim that always butcher it.
yeah.
And Finding
Like
Zen
if I
over
recall,
on Rumble says, I draw
like
and
if
I'm
I
an alright draftsman. AI is great, but you still have to
like
import
it,
the product into Photoshop, CorelDRAW, etc., just to fix what it got wrong. That's why I like about Invoke, they give you a lot of tools for doing that right there inside the system. Because trying to have all those models loaded up and load up Photoshop at the same time, Photoshop is such a bloat that you basically have to unload your models, go back to Photoshop, and then you have to load your models when you take it back into the AI. But they're just constantly adding new features to Invoke.
speaking of Oliver Twist, apparently I mean, it's been a long time since I've read the book too, but apparently a lot of people who say one thing a lot of the adaptations get wrong is that they try to portray the pickpocketers as, as basically, sympathetic villains. It's like, yeah, they're thieves, but they're living in poverty and they're just trying to survive. Whereas if I recall correctly in the book, they're just as bad as, the people.
You mean the other orphans?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I forget how that happened. And like another example that gets lost is Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. They're like, oh, well, he was just stealing a loaf of bread to, feed his family. Okay, well, that makes him sympathetic. But the novel doesn't say it was justified for him to steal it. He
Yeah,
was properly arrested and convicted of theft. But they just kept the punishment going way, way, way out of proportion to the crime.
Yeah.
And just kept saying, okay, now here's your release date. And then that release date would come and then they'd extend it. That was the problem. Yeah. The punishment not fitting the crime.
Yeah, it's a problem we still see. It's a problem we still see to this day. Yep.
Oh, you smoked an ounce of marijuana? Okay, into jail for 20 years for being a drug dealer.
Yep.
Because you had 5 ounces on you or whatever.
I've had conversations with people about, the Norwegian system, and some people, people in America on both sides get it wrong. Like, so many people think that the Norwegian system coddles criminals, and the diehards say that's only going to encourage them to commit more crime, and the people on the left said, well, that'll make them not want to commit crime. But I've spoken to actual people who live in Norway. Contrary to popular belief, Norway doesn't coddle prisoners. Rather, the way the Norwegian system works is that it's based on redemption, meaning you made a mistake and we're going to punish you, but we're going to give you school, but we're going to teach you tricks, trades, so when you're released, you can become a productive member of society and you won't commit crimes anymore. The US system is retributive, basically meaning you committed a crime, so you're going to rot in this cell till you're 85 years old.
And the idea is to make it unpleasant, yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to just make it a trade school.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this YouTuber called Larry Lawton, and he's pretty good because he's an ex-prisoner. He's a former jewel thief himself, and he's had connections to the mafia, and he's in all for prison reform, and he's actually pretty cool, and he does a lot of He's not perfect though. Like, for instance, he was talking about a video, and he was talking about prison reform, and he said, "Well, one thing I would absolutely do is get rid of private prisons. Private prisons don't exist.
Yeah, no such thing.
At least not in the way you think they do. It's like, some people are like, well, private prisons are the problem because they're the ones that lobby the government for all these strict rules and all that. No, the only thing private prisons do is that a private institution is in charge of the upkeep. The rules and the punishment are laid for by the government."
Yep.
And
they don't arrest people. They don't convict them. They don't pass the laws.
What?
Government does all that.
Sorry, I cut off. Sorry. Yeah. Problem is, one of them is war on drugs. That's one of the issues, and another one is, like I said, is that we're too retributive. And the sad reality is, like, and he actually brought this up, in this one case, about I forgot his name, but he was like a 13-year-old, and he was severely bullied, and he ended in a fit of rage. He killed a 4-year-old boy, but he deeply regretted it, and he was sentenced to. And despite being only 13, he was tried as an adult, and he was given 5 to life, and he was recently paroled. And the family of the victim who was killed, said no, he shouldn't be there. He should be spending the rest of his life in prison. Larry Lawton brought up a pretty good point. It's like, listen, there's no denying what you went through as a tragedy, but I think you need to learn to let it go. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think keeping him in prison is going to help you much anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not getting, like, yeah, it sucks, that happens, but I really, really hate it when courts, base, the decision of the punishment based on, well, what do the families of the victim think? The problem is that, nothing against them, they're emotional and they're not thinking in the right head, Like, I remember one time, there was a case, where a kid was wrongfully convicted of a murder, and at the time, the family of the victim who was murdered said, "Oh yeah, we feel like justice has been done, even though the court was clearly botched, and the kid was, wasn't given a fair trial." And people were like, "Well, the victim said they felt justice had been served," and I was just thinking, yeah, because it was their dad that was killed. If you can convince them that a rock killed their father, they'd hate all rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it might be controversial, but there have been some prisoner reformers that have said that unless they actually can contribute, like if they were a witness to the crime, the family of the victim should not be present during the court hearing, because there's fears that then they're going to get emotional, then the juries are going to see them, they're going to be like, "Oh, look at those poor people. Yeah, this guy definitely is a monster. I don't care if the evidence doesn't match up. He made these people cry. We got to punish him." Yeah. Oh, sorry, my mom's calling me.
Okay. SpaceX is urging the FCC to greenlight gigabit Starlink upgrades. It's amazing how fast that is. Because even getting Wi-Fi at a true gigabit per second from like the next room over is challenging. Owner of Tesla Cybertruck pummeled during Orpheus parade. Yeesh.
Sorry about that. What were you saying?
I was looking at a story where the owner of a Cybertruck was pummeled during the Orpheus parade.
Hmm. I wish I was a writer. I wish I was a writer for the Babylon Bee, because I thought of a funny parody article that can make fun of the Tesla, that can make fun of them, that can make fun of the Tesla riots and all that. Is basically saying people, the best way to fight people, all those radical left wing environmentalists who hate Elon Musk. I found a solution to get revenge on him. Don't buy an electric car, buy a gas guzzler.
Yeah, buy a Hummer.
Yeah. That's another thing too about that, because the irony is that a lot of the people that own the Tesla cars, they tend to be the people that are, that under normal circumstances would probably support what a lot of these left-wing activists would support, just they're not as radicalized, because they're electric vehicles and they care about the environment.
And a lot of them don't even see a problem with what Doge is doing. We're seeing a lot of Tesla people who haven't really been political speaking out, and it's like, why are you having problems with what Doge is doing?
Yeah. Yeah,
They're
that's another
finding
thing.
fraud and abuse in taxpayer spending. Why would you be against that?
Yeah, and if you do still have an issue with Elon Musk and all that, then as many people pointed out, what you're supposed to do then is assemble and contact your congressman and do something about, get the politics involved, or try to figure out some injunction against it. Don't attack people that have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, you end up like Robespierre.
I don't know. It's always been the Tesla haters, and I think it's just another excuse.
Yeah. I'll admit, I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk myself, but a lot of the stuff that they claim he's doing, like, it's the same thing as Trump. There's a lot of stuff I don't like about Trump, but people are hating him for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Like, people are saying, like, like, especially the whole thing with Canada, like, annexing people. It's like, I just wanted to say, people, did you not learn your lesson from his first term? Trump's a big talker. That doesn't mean he's actually going to go through with it.
Trump is a negotiator. He'll ask for everything, threaten you with the worst, and let you talk him down to something more reasonable. That's just how he operates.
Yep. He's a businessman, and from what I understand, that's what businessmen do all the time. That's how you get the deal, because you don't want to be too soft. Otherwise, people are going to walk all over for you. So basically, a common trick that some charismatic businessmen will do is, like you said, they threaten the worst, and they do a big talk, and they want everything or nothing, and then when the person talks them down to something which is what they want all along, they agree to it.
And so Trump agrees to it, and the news media goes, he really put one over on Trump.
I mean, going back to what I said about tariffs, even though I agree that Trump's tariffs are wrong and they're a stupid idea, the thing I find hilarious is, like, how when the Canadian Prime Minister and the Mexican president, said they were going to counter raise their tariffs against the United States, and the media was like, oh, these people are taking a stand against Trump. It's like, the only thing those counter tariffs are going to hurt are the Mexicans and the Canadians.
Yeah.
Because if anyone who actually knows anything about economics knows that the irony is that tariffs hurt the people of the country that passed them. Not the country they're passed against. Like, I know I'm just weird like that, but like, if I was the Canadian Prime Minister and all that, and Trump said, I'm gonna raise tariffs on you, I would have just been like, okay, doesn't hurt me.
I'm gonna shoot myself in the foot. Okay, go ahead. Your foot, I guess.
Yeah, it's not gonna hurt me. It's like, you're only gonna hurt your own citizens.
Japan has a rechargeable battery powered by nuclear waste. Oh, they're talking about depleted uranium. So using uranium instead of lithium or whatever. I was thinking, like, proper, like, radioactive waste. And I was like, how are they going to do that?
Yeah, it reminds me of a Velociraptor quote. So, if the sun is a giant ball of nuclear fission, does that mean solar power is a form of nuclear energy?
Yes, it does. All of our energy is nuclear, if you think about it. Because either we get the energy directly or indirectly from the sun. Fossil fuels are basically stored energy from the sun, the plants took through photosynthesis, or, solar panels, or the water cycle, or whatever. And the sun is a nuclear generator. Or you dig up the magic rocks to do actual nuclear power. Or the only other way to get power is geothermally from the Earth's core, which, guess what's generating all that heat?
Yeah.
That's all uranium and all sorts of other radioactive materials that's keeping it warm, because otherwise it would have cooled down by now.
Yep. I remember reading the Magic School Bus, and and like how one fun thing about the Magic School Bus is they have those editors where people say that's unrealistic. How did the children go to the center of the Earth without melting? But actually, now in hindsight, it's one thing that people don't break up. It's like, well, even if they did,
you cut off again.
Oh, I was about to say, because in Magic School Bus, when they went to the center of the Earth, like, there was people that were saying, how could the bus survive going through the center of the Earth without melting? And I'm just thinking now, how did they survive the radiation?
You are aware of the title. It's the Magic School Bus.
Yeah, I know that.
Oh, France does a lot of recycling nuclear waste. I think France is the only country with a proper infrastructure for that. Of course, the solution now is to just not worry about it and burn it all at once, like in the Natrium reactor.
Yeah, I don't get
The
the.
only
I don't
catch
get. I
with
don't
that
get.
is you have to leave the neutrons fast, which means you can't use water, so you have to use something like liquid sodium or something.
It's one thing I don't. Yeah, I don't get why. I don't get why so many environmentalists label nuclear energy as unnatural. Nuclear energy is the most natural thing out there.
Yeah.
Nuclear energy.
Well, and talk about sustainable. If we could use all of the um all of the nuclear material that we can get to, including mining uranium and thorium from the oceans, we've got enough to last us millions of years. And people are saying, no, solar is renewable. Well, no, it isn't, because the solar panels go bad after 10 or 15 years.
Yep.
Wind's renewable? No, because the turbines don't last 10.
By the way, I saw an interesting documentary one time about the environmental movement in Europe, and guess who? Guess who was funding? Guess who was funding a lot of the anti-nuclear energy / anti-fracking legislation in Europe.
Big oil companies or Russia or someone like that.
Yep. It was the Russian gas and oil oligarchs.
Yeah. Yep.
Because they wanted because nuclear energy and fracking would would hamper their monopoly. If I recall correctly,
mind you, they're fine having nuclear energy for themselves, but they want other countries not to have it so that they can export natural gas to them.
Yeah.
That was basically how they had all that influence over Germany before the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed.
I don't know which president was under. It may have been under Obama, but that was actually, if I remember, I remember reading that's actually what one foreign advisor said, how we could fight back against Russia and Putin without actually firing any shots. It's like, it's simple. We've got large natural gas reserves. How about we process it, sell it to Europe at a discount, so they'll start buying our gasoline and stop being dependent on Russian gasoline. But the problem fell through because of pressure from environmental groups, because fracking is evil and bad.
Yeah.
Reminds me of and speaking of oil, Venezuela is a perfectly good example of, just because you have rich natural resources does not mean you're going to be a rich nation. Like, I've seen so many people say, well, why can't the Venezuelan workers, own the oil? It's their oil. Well, do they know how to process and refine it?
The government didn't even know how to ship it.
Yep. Yeah, if I recall correctly, the only reason Venezuela got rich off of oil money was basically because they formed an economic alliance with Russia and OPEC, and basically convinced them, we'll cap how much oil we'll sell, so the oil that comes from Russia and the Middle East, will be much more scarcer, and therefore Venezuelan oil will be worth more. That's literally how the socialists got rich off of oil money. That's literally what Hugo Chavez did. He didn't make the oil more profitable. He just convinced Russia and the Middle East to lower the supply, but they couldn't do that forever.
Oh, lots more people say, we made a breakthrough in fusion. We made a breakthrough in fusion. Did you get more energy out of it than you put into it? No. But there's like several people trying to jump on that bandwagon.
A lot of environmentalists are genuinely anti-human. Reminds me of the film Carnosaur, where that one scientist wants to kill off humans and replace them with dinosaurs because humans are destroying the planet and all that, but dinosaurs won't do that. I just want to jump into that movie and say, lady, you want to know how the dinosaurs died? Because an asteroid hit the Earth, caused a a quasi nuclear winter and killed them off. Humans actually have the ability to deflect a similar asteroid like that.
Man, it's just like every single news story is a copy of the next. I'm just trying to see if there's anything more that's happened in the world.
The whole thing with Venezuela and its nationalization failing us, something that actually reminds me of an interesting thing I saw on the Guatemalan coup d'état where someone asked, how would you take care of Guatemala without without funding a coup? And he said, this guy actually had a pretty funny thing. He said, what I would have done is I would have let them implement the socialist policies, and then when the socialist policies failed, like they did in Venezuela, then I'd go to the Guatemalan government and say, hey, we'll bail you out if you'd be more pro-US.
Yeah.
Because let's be real here, while the Guatemalan coup was wrong, the fact of the matter is, had it not occurred and the government been allowed to create the reforms, the Guatemalan economy would have crashed and there would have been a civil war regardless. That's just the sad reality of it.
Yeah.
Because if you read the plans on what they wanted to do, like they did, like they wanted to seize land that wasn't being used, because it's unproductive, ignoring the fact that sometimes you don't need to do that. I mean, literally, Hugo Chavez did that. Said, oh, you're not using that land? Well, then you're forfeiting it, so now it's state-owned, and he only made things worse. People, the mutualists who say if you're not using it, then it's forfeited. You need to be constantly using it in order to make, in order to lay claim to it. Guess what? That kind of mentality is why we had the Dust Bowl, because the government encouraged farmers to constantly be farming 24/7 when turns out soil needs time to heal.
Yep. And you need to let weeds grow and then till them under, and then that restabilizes it and helps to get the nutrients back into it.
So contrary to what your mom and pop told you when you were doing gardening work, you actually don't want to get rid of weeds. Very few weeds are actually harmful to plants.
Well, you do while you're gardening because you need the plants to grow where they are, but yeah, in the off season, let the weeds grow.
Yeah. I think some weeds are unfairly judged. Like so many people say, look at dandelions, they're weed. I think dandelions are pretty.
Yeah, they're nice.
Yeah. I like how there was one person that pointed out, like, the people say, it's like, oh, these weeds, do all this bad stuff and they prevent my flowers from growing because these flowers I want to grow can't grow unless, it's specific and all that. And there was one scientist who said, yeah, that means that from an evolutionary standpoint, that flower shouldn't be in your garden because it's not meant for that environment.
Yeah, it's not native, and so you have to do stuff to kind of make it work.
Yep. Yeah, I know Penn and Teller did an episode about this, but yep, there actually have been a couple of of economists that have actually written books about lawns and how much of a waste of time it is for most Americans. And speaking of lawns, what's your opinion on HOAs? Because I hear a lot of horror stories about them.
Yeah, they're basically mini governments, and people say, well, you libertarians should like them because they're private. Yeah, except they're not, are they? They get their powers from local governments.
Oh yeah, like yeah, you'll hear
Because
stories like yeah,
otherwise, you'd be able to say, hey, you can't tell me how tall to make my grass. I'm going to sue you for that. But nope, not if
yep.
it's an HOA.
Well, if I recall correctly, a lot of a lot of those HOAs, make you sign contracts. Like, when people say, hear stories about how this guy got arrested because he didn't mow his lawn. Like, listen, not mowing your lawn is not a crime. Basically, what they do is they say, oh, you didn't mow your lawn, you violated your contract, now you're going to prison. Fun fact, that's the reason why a lot of libertarians are against property taxes, because in a way, a property tax is essentially the government saying, yeah, you don't have 100% ownership of your property.
Yep.
Yep.
It's a protection racket.
Yep. Like no joke, There's been people that have sued the government, like there's been people that live in the rural area and they state, listen, I take care of all myself. I don't use the public water because I have a well. You know, I get an I have a private company that provides my electricity. I pay them. I pay for, all the stuff on my property. I either pay a company to do, or I do it myself. Like with water, I have a well and all that. Why should I have to pay federal property tax? Because when the federal government doesn't really do anything for my property, but the government just goes, well, you gotta pay it because that's the law.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, property tax is the reason why, if you hate modern society and you wanna run away to the woods and spend the rest of your life as a hermit, that's the reason why you can't do that anymore. Because the federal government's still gonna come along and say, oh no, that little cabin you're living in, you still gotta pay taxes on it. Even though you're a hunter gatherer and you do everything yourself, and you use an outhouse and you watch yourself and you use a local river to get your water and all that, doesn't matter. The federal government still says you got to pay your taxes.
Oh, and this is interesting. There's now a Collar Doolittle Prize offering up to $500,000 for scientists who can use AI to translate animal noises. Like there's been this one group doing, humpback whales, but it's like, what do elephants mean when they trumpet, or what do all these other things mean? And they've been doing lots of very slow research into different chimpanzee sounds, where like one sound means, everyone get up and look. Another sound means everyone crouch down. Another sound means get up into the trees.
Yeah,
But
sounds
there's all
interesting.
these complex sounds. What do they mean? That's more difficult to crack because you don't have a
I
Rosetta
mean that.
Stone.
I mean that makes sense. As long as it's not, trying to translate. As long as they're not spending money trying to translate stuff that is kind of obvious. Like, because there are some noises that animals make that are kind of obvious as to what they mean.
Yeah, but when you've got humpback whales talking back and forth with whales that are hundreds of miles away, it's like, what the hell are they saying to each other?
Maybe
That
they're
wouldn't be a
gossiping.
mating call. You wouldn't do a mating call to, an animal hundreds of miles away.
Maybe they're gossiping.
What do you say to people that atheism killed more than religion? I can't find where atheism killed anyone. It's always like communism kills, and well, communism didn't have a god except it did. It was the government. But it was the same kind of, non-rational thinking. Show me a time when rational skepticism and naturalistic empiricism killed people. Because I can show you when it saved 1 billion lives from just one guy. One guy saved 1 billion lives, Norman Borlaug.
Oh, I thought he poisoned us and doomed us all. Well, where
Well,
are the
according to the
bodies?
GMO people, I guess he did. The anti-GMO people, I guess he did.
Yeah. I still want to ask, all those people that are talking about like all these, all this stuff, all these chemicals, sugars, and all that. They're killing us, and I want to say, where's the bodies?
The 30 Years' War killed more people per capita than World War II. I have to check that, but wow. I mean, the 30 Years' War was really nasty. Lots of people lost everything. And that's why so many people from that area ended up coming to America, because they just couldn't recover from it.
Yep. Speaking of which, I've actually seen some historians, make the argument that, that the British taxes on the colonies were justifiable because, well, the British government did spend a lot of money, defending the American colony from the French during the French and Indian War. But many people have pointed out, but here's the thing, the Americans crown that started the war with France. I've seen some historians, try to justify the taxes the British had on the colonies, and some people have said, and a bunch of people, have said, well, the British, they spent money protecting, the American colonies from France during the French and Indian War. But many people have pointed out, but it wasn't the American colonists that declared war on France; it was England that did that.
Yeah, and England and France were the ones who were stirring up violence of the natives against the colonists, when the colonists weren't doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, contrary to what some cynics like to say, too, about, and this goes back to the natives, a lot of cynics like to say, actually, what you were taught in school, what's wrong? What really happened was the colonists came and they wiped out the natives and then took their land. No, that was the government. If you actually read the accounts, the natives and the settlers, most of them actually got along pretty fine. It wasn't until the governments of both sides came into play,
Well, and there was plenty of room.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you had to kick natives off your land. There was plenty of room in the areas like between tribes and everything.
Yeah. So yeah, SJW. So yeah, Project 1619 people. It wasn't the white settlers that killed the natives. It was the government. Of course, they'll always say, "Oh, but the government was composed of white settlers."
Well, no, most of them weren't settlers. Most of them were French and British.
Yep.
And because I mean, if you look at one of the complaints of the Revolution, it was the fact that the colonies weren't governed themselves. They had a royal governor who was a British guy. And they didn't want royal governors, they wanted their own governors.
Yep.
Do you think find a job you love is good or bad advice? I mean, good advice if you can do it.
Yep.
I mean, love a job you can find is also good advice too. Like, don't get your mind set on one thing. Look at all of your options there and be open to something that might unexpectedly sing to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not too happy with how my life's going, and I have thought about going back. I have considered, maybe going back to college, but the problem is that, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's just my autism, but I just don't like school. That's hard to explain to people. It's like, I'm not against education. I love learning. I just really, really fucking hate school. I hate being stuck in a building for hours at a time and being told the only way you can pass the class is is you have to take a memory exam, and you have to do hours worth of paperwork every night. It's one thing looking back, I still don't see how homework is teaching us, for the real world.
It
Like,
doesn't. They
my
say it's supposed to teach you good work habits. It doesn't.
Yeah, because think of it this way: unless you work from home, or there's crunch time going on at your office, what typically happens when the workday is over? Do they say, okay, here's work to take home, get it done? No, it's usually, oh, okay, see you, Shane. See you tomorrow, Shane. Have a good evening. That's usually what it is.
Find a job that's not unbearable. Well, I mean, it's kind of weird the kind of jobs you can love. You can love a fast food job if that's, getting you by while you're getting the rest of your career going, but you're working with great people and you got a great boss and it's nice and close by. You don't have to drive a lot. You might love that job while you have it. On the other hand, you might get a good job with a good career prospects and it doesn't pay what it should, and your coworkers are asses and your boss is a slave driver. I can't even work in one building for more than 4 hours up from not the same place. Well, there's lots of stuff you can do there. You could drive for Uber and Lyft, or, deliver for Uber Eats, or what's that other one?
DoorDash.
DoorDash, yeah.
DoorDash.
Or
I have a
just do the kind of thing where you're like someone who's servicing other businesses.
Oh yeah, speaking of servicing, that's another thing I hate too, is when people say, "Oh, the reason America is doing so poorly is because we're no longer a production economy, we're a service-based economy." To which I say, everything's a service-based economy. Like, what do you think those people who were inventing car and metallic parts were doing? They were making them for themselves? No, they were making them with the intention to sell them to someone else. That's a service.
There's young people complaining about working in general because we gave them bad job advice, follow your passion and all that.
Yeah, that is true. Yep.
Yeah, following your passion is good, but also having a good work ethic is good. Appreciating
Well,
the
yeah,
value of money is good.
Yep.
And how life is a balance is good.
It reminds me of an episode of Duck Dynasty where you've heard of that show, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and Sai, back when he was still alive, yeah, Sai, he was volunteering to be Santa at this school for a Christmas party, and this one girl says, "I want an art set," and he's like, "Oh, you want an art set? Yeah, I want to be an artist." And he's like, "There ain't no money in that." I mean, I wouldn't say that's true, but many people have pointed out he does kind of have a point. I mean, you can make
the money
as
is
an
where
artist.
you find it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did lots of other stuff. I did IT for 20 years. I did application development, and I also, expanded my horizons, did stuff like desktop publishing, and I've done all sorts of things.
I think the problem with some people with art is that they think that that they want to be like, Vincent van Gogh, or they want to make money, selling arts to museum and all that. And the fact of the matter is, trying to be a celebrity artist is like trying to be a movie star. It's not going to happen. If you want to make money being an artist, you're going to have to go to and be like, and get into like advertisement or something. That's actually something I've heard some people say. Like, they say, "Well, I want to make money being an artist," and they say, "Well, then here's what you do: focus on art in your free time. Go to college for things like marketing and whatnot, because that's how you're going to practically make money as an artist, is by basically working for a marketing firm, and like painting billboards and stuff like that, etc." You know what I'm talking about.
The term is a day job.
Yep.
You can do art or play music in the night, and if you can get a few gigs, that's good. You can, play at a local bar or whatever. Maybe you could get some art in an art show, and maybe someone will buy a piece or two. But You gotta pay the bills.
Yep. I mean, heck, even a lot of famous, musicians and celebrities, they didn't, say, okay, once I'm done with school, I'm immediately gonna become, a musician, and that's all I'm gonna do. No, a lot of them did have daytime jobs before they became famous.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Took a long time for them to break out.
yeah. Like I forgot who it was. I think it might have been Scott Whalen, but I can't remember. But there was one, famous musician and singer, and he flat out said, in my early days, I barely made any money being a singer, even when we signed onto a contract, and I was literally working at a record store, and I would work there for 8 hours a day. Then immediately after work, I would go to the studio and start recording, basically.
And I mean, like an actor, even when you get attention and get jobs, God, who was it? It was one of the kind of supporting actors in Babylon 5, but I forget which character it was. But he was at a convention and people were asking him questions about that. And it was like, well, I'm an actor. I got some good roles. Nice to have, fairly steady work in Babylon 5. But primarily, I've been a carpenter because between roles, I've still got to make money and the roles aren't always there.
Yep.
Even a comfortable day job is challenging for, oh yeah. Yeah. It's a job for a reason.
Yep. Yeah, to quote
And
to
some
quote
of the
Kirby
some of the
from the
most rewarding jobs are jobs that are like 95% hard work. And the reward really comes at the end and you're finally like, oh, that was all worth it. But up to that point.
Yeah. And to quote Kirby from the film The Brave Little Toaster, chores aren't supposed to be fun. It's work. I think that's another problem that Gen Z is having with the job to them is that
Oh
we
yeah,
taught
finding
them
and getting the
is
job.
that we
Yeah.
taught them yeah, it's we taught them about finding and getting job, but we also taught them, about how, like, if you put your passion into it, you'll be happy all the time and all that. But it's like, no, even people who absolutely love their jobs will tell you, yeah, there's plenty of days where I just want to strangle myself because I can't handle it.
Even a job you love can eventually get boring. So my advice, don't make it more than a side hustle. Oh, you can really get burned out. That's happening to a lot of VFX artists because
Yeah.
Hollywood is not treating them all that well.
Oh yeah.
Because a VFX studio, oh, we'll pay you so much to do this movie. And so, okay, now it's like 2 or 3 weeks until the movie's released. And now the producers are like, oh, we changed all these scenes. You have to redo all the graphics. It's like, we don't really have time for that. Well, you got to get it done. Well, can we have more money? Well, no. Well, can we hire more people?
Yeah, that happens in the
No.
video game
And
industry
they're
all the
just,
time. The video game
sorry, you were saying?
it's same. I was about to say the same thing happens in the video game industry. There's plenty of cases, where so many video games, there's like video games that had potential, but they ended up bombing big time and they were terrible. And they asked the lead programmer, like, why did this game fail so badly? It had so much promise and it had all this time. It's like, well, think of it this way. What happened is that we were approached by the executive producers, and they said, okay, here's the deal. We're gonna give you this budget, and we want this thing, and we want this game to have this, that, and this. Okay, yeah, that's doable. Oh yeah, also the publisher wants it done by Christmas, so you've only got 6 months to complete the game.
You want to know why that final battle in Black Panther sucked so badly? Because exactly that happened.
Yep.
That was exactly it. That team is really talented. That's the same people who pulled off Endgame, the final battle there.
Yep.
They are good. They know what they're doing. But when you change it last minute like that,
Yep.
and you don't give them any more resources to work with, and you don't give them any more people, you just got to do a rush job, and that's what you end up with.
Yep. Yeah, fun fact, that's why notorious. I haven't played Half-Life 3, but it was bad. And one of the lead producers says the reason why the ending was terrible was because here's the deal. Half-Life 3 was a very big game. It was an open world RPG games, which are very big, and they need a lot of time and development. Now with the previous two, the development team had 3 years to complete the game. With Half-Life 3, the producers were like, yeah, we want it to have this, that, and this, that, and this. Oh yeah, but we want it to be shipped right away. So you've only got 2 years to do it, which a lot of producers have said, which a lot of programmers in video games will tell you that is not enough to complete a game like Mass Effect.
Yeah, I mean, a game like that, you're going to be working 4 years on it at least if you want to do a good job.
Yeah, a lot of people say.
And same thing with big CGI movies. Like you want to make a Toy Story movie, you're going to spend 4 years on it. But computers are so much faster than they were then. Yeah, and we're doing a lot more with it.
Yeah.
That's the Blinn effect. All right, we have been at this for 2 hours. Anything else you want to talk about right quick before we shut this one down?
Oh.
All right, yeah, just kind of looking at the chat. The findings in, I think, is Rumble like really, really behind? Because now he's saying like homeowners associations are a scam. He's like several minutes behind. Norman Borlaug was a real American hero. RFK Jr., by contrast, is a charlatan marketed as one. I agree with that. The 1619 Project is a fraud. All right. All right. Sounds good, everyone. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for donating. Thank you for watching. Remember, donate.pagosity.tv. Keep me doing what I'm doing. And by the way, check out, I got a video tomorrow, really long one. I'm going to put a clip of it up after that of the really important part that's like 5 minutes, but about the AI Cadre v Meta case. And basically it's a crash course in fair use. You watch tomorrow's video, you will know far more about fair use than even most lawyers probably. So please check that out. Thank you for watching. Till next time, stay strong